I don't understand it. How am I going to pass the test? Mr. Anger, I didn't do well on all my checkups. I bombed them. The self-test is hard. There's no way I'm going to pass this PACE test. I just talked with 2 students this week, had this very conversation. And that made me think, maybe I should make a video and help some of my other students, okay? So what would I tell a student who says, this is too hard, I don't understand it? What do I do? How do I prepare for the test? So first of all, most students think that the way to prepare is to just read the self-test, read the checkups. No, just reading it is not going to help you learn it. I'm thinking right now, both of these students were trying to do biology PACEs. There's a lot of weird words in biology. There's so much terminology that there's no way you can read it and just hold on to it and understand it and never have to study it, okay? So what I always tell my students, and I want to share with you, is that one of our goals in high school is not just to learn the material, it's also to learn how do we learn? How does our brain work? What methods work for me, okay? And you have to figure out for yourself what methods help you to learn material and hold on to it. Because when you go on to college, if you do that, and even in even in a job, a lot of times they have training materials you have to go through. One of my boys and one of my daughters as well are both had to pass an insurance test. There was a lot of things they had to learn and memorize in order to pass that test. So how do we effectively memorize? Okay? So it's not like everything, you should feel like if I don't get it, I'm dumb, okay? Or everybody else must just read it and get it. No, that's not true. We have to find ways to make our brain hold on to it, all right? So let me illustrate, first of all, something here. This is called our working memory. So I'll just abbreviate it, WM. The working memory is what our brain is actually thinking about, okay? So we have lots of things that come into our brain, the things we read in our PACE, the things we kind of review before we do a checkup. But that's just because it was in our brain for a while and maybe short term we kind of crammed it in there, we held on to it long enough to do the checkup, but all of a sudden you get to the self-test and then you realize, I have to turn this in and a day later do the PACE test. I'm not going to remember this. It's going to be gone, all right? That's because we need to get it into what's called long-term memory, okay? That's like your hard drive. That's where things get stored so that long time from now you can pull it up. There's a lot of things that we store in our memory. Maybe your parents' phone number, so that if you're ever out and you need to call them, you have your phone number memorized, your address you probably have memorized. You know the names of your friends, maybe you know some of their middle names, okay? And so a lot of information we hold on to long term. And if someone just asked you, spur of the moment, boom, you could pop up with that information. It'd be easy to recall certain things. There are certain verses that you've known since you were a little kid, right? John 3:16, you could probably quote that right away. John 11:35, Jesus wept, right? So you know some verses off the top of your head very easily, and that's because they are stored in your long-term memory. Now here's the key. Ready? This is what's important. We have to regularly be pushing things from our working memory into long-term, and then we have to keep trying to pull it up, and trying to pull it up, and trying to pull it up. And so this is where checkups are trying to pull information that we have learned. And then the self-test tries to pull it up. But sometimes we need more help. Let's take a hard subject like biology, okay? We need to do some extra work before we do the checkup, self-test, PACE test to practice putting things into long-term memory. Hope that, try to get them to stick in there and then be able to pull it up into our short-term working memory. So this is where having a friend or a parent, somebody quizzing you, asking you questions, okay? And then you have to think of the answer and provide the answer, and then they check you, give you immediate feedback, okay? That's part of this process. And then if you don't have the right answer, then you think, okay, what was the right answer? Find the right answer, and then try to find a way to hold on to that. And then a few minutes later, an hour later, the next day, try to pull it up again. And you keep trying this cycle. That cycle is called the learning cycle. It's part of review. Review is a very important part of learning, okay? You know this from trying to memorize verses and memorize some of the little paragraphs that you have to quote in your history. You have to say it over and over and over. And so the same thing is true in, let's say, world geography, capitals, things like that, or in biology. So let's talk about some specific, let me give some examples. How can we try to get something into long-term memory and try to make it stick? Well, everybody has different kinds of brains, okay? My type of brain focuses on letters and sounds, and I can make associations that way. But some students find that having making a picture, drawing a picture, really helps them hold on to it better, all right? And maybe that's you. I have one student who is graduating this year. She really liked making up songs. So she would get a tune, and she would try to take information she had to memorize and make it into a little bit of a rhyme, put a tune with it, and then she could kind of sing it. And making a song out of it really helps her. So you have to experiment, and that's what I was saying earlier, is you need to figure out what works for you, okay? One of my boys, when he was in high school, he really liked just studying on his own. He would ask himself a question, close his eyes, try to think of the answer, and then he would look at his study guide and see if he got it right, and then he would read the next question without seeing the answer, try to come up with the answer, but he did not want to interact with anybody. He wanted to do it on his own. And then he would go to bed, sleep on it. Next morning, he would think about it while he was taking a shower, check himself again, and for some reason, there actually is some science behind this, that when we have thought about something right before we go to sleep, our brain kind of helps organize it and make it gel. And then the next day, it's organized and our brain is able to retrieve it better. So actually, you would do better to study at night and then take your test in the morning. There's some science behind that, all right? Try it. On the other hand, I have a daughter who she did not like to study on her own. She always would make a study guide and have my wife quiz her, ask her the questions. The answers would be on the study guide, but she wanted to hear the question. She would come up with the answer in her head, offer the answer. My wife would give her feedback on whether she was right or wrong. Every checkup, every self-test, before she would do a PACE test, she would always go through this verbal interaction. Some students need that, okay? So they're more auditory. They hear and need that interaction. So try that, see if that helps, okay? Let me give you a couple specifics. So in this science PACE biology that I was just helping a student with, we had to talk about the different parts of the heart and some of the blood vessels, okay? So a long time ago, I came up with, okay, that looks like a Valentine heart. That's not really the shape of a heart, but it kind of looks like a Valentine heart. But this helps remind me, see the V here at the bottom? The V at the bottom reminds me that the ventricles are at the bottom of the heart. So again, see, I hear the V sound, and I'm picturing the V on the heart to think about ventricles. Then the top of the heart is the atriums, right? So the A, I always think A is like the beginning of the alphabet, so the A is at the top of the heart, the ventricle is at the bottom. Now weirdly, this is the opposite. Left and right is the opposite. So this is the right side and this is the left side. And the reason is because if a patient were laying on the table and the doctor is working on the heart, he would be seeing it from this view, but this is the patient's right side, okay? Because they're seeing out, so this is the right side of my heart, this is the left side of my heart, but when you're looking at it, it's right over here, left over here. So you have to that's why, okay, if that helps you at all. It's the opposite of what you think. You look at it and say, this should be left, this should be right. Then, what about veins and arteries? Okay, so the arteries are always going away from the heart, and the veins, okay, are coming in. And I always, again, I think of the word vein and associate it with the word vain as in worthless. So the blood has lost all of its oxygen and has picked up all the waste from the body, and now the used up blood, so to speak, is coming back to the heart, and then the heart and lungs are going to rejuvenate the blood with more food and oxygen, and then that's going to go out through the arteries to all the parts of the body, and then the veins will feed it back in. All right, so I'm just showing you, see these little associations, vein, blood, veins come back to the heart. I just kind of made those up. I didn't read those anywhere, okay? You might think of a better way of doing it that makes sense to you, okay? Go for it. There are 4 types of blood cells, okay? We have red blood cells, white blood cells, there are platelets, and there is plasma. So, and if they all kind of run together in your mind and you can't keep them straight, okay, choose the easiest one to kind of lock into and hold on to that one. So when I think of the white blood cells, I always associate white with the doctor's gowns, nurses, the old-fashioned nurses wearing, white jackets and a white hat. And they're the good people, okay, they're the good ones. So the white is kind of like the doctors and the nurses. They're heading out to fight off infection and to help the body fight off disease, just like doctors and nurses, okay? Then the red blood cells in the paste, one of the big things that they link that to is iron, and that hemoglobin and iron are needed and give it the red color. Well, again, I'm hearing the sound R, iron, and red blood cells, and I kind of, in my mind, hear those sounds and link iron and red. I know it's stupid, but I link them together. Same with platelets, and what do? They clot. Okay? See all the T's in here? Platelets and clot. So that is a repetition of that T sound, platelets and clotting. And then the plasma is the liquid, and really that's the only one left, but if you want to associate that, the L, plasma, and liquid. When I think of platelets too, I don't know, I can picture these strands floating around in the blood, and they kind of lock together and make like a web. And that's what causes the clotting to happen, and doesn't allow the blood to flow out. So maybe there's something you could think about with a plate. You ever wash dishes and then the plate gets stuck against the drain and doesn't allow the water to go down the drain? I don't know, something stupid. And it doesn't matter. The stupider it is, the better you'll remember it, okay? And whatever association you make, don't try to take somebody else's, make your own association, and then it will stick with you better. Which leads me to another thing I want to say here, and that is you should do a study guide before you do a checkup or a self-test. But here's what you should do. This is what I encourage my students to do. Don't make a study guide with every single question, okay? Hopefully, you know a lot of the information that's going to be on that checkup or self-test. So have one of your teachers or a friend quiz you, and then you just put dots next to the ones that you don't know or that you got wrong. They just shouldn't tell you the answer, okay? And then you go back and you make a study guide. And don't just write, true, true, false, false, true, or, C, G, F, B, C. No, don't just memorize the answers. Make a statement, okay, where you link them together. So if this was confusing, make a study guide where you're linking these together. Draw a picture of the heart. Keep track of which is the arteries, the veins. The superior vena cava comes from above. Superior is above. The inferior is coming from below. Okay, superior above, inferior below. They're feeding into the right atrium, which looks like it's the left, but it's the right. So you make these diagrams, you make a study guide, but there's no reason to study all the stuff you already know. The key is to keep reviewing what you didn't know. So then after you make the study guide, now you can have somebody quiz you from that study guide. And if you still get some things wrong, those are hopefully each time you study, you're narrowing it down until you just have a few things that you're having a hard time with, and do something. Make a song, draw a picture, do something to try to help you memorize that, okay? Don't take somebody else's study guide. You might have a friend who went through that pace. Oh, I did that pace earlier. I have a study guide for that. Some students have found Quizlet online and said, oh, Quizlet has study guides. Well, somebody else made those study guides, okay? That helped them, but that's not going to help you. Now, if you want to make your own Quizlet study guide with the stuff you need to know, here's another thing about Quizlet I'll just tell you. A lot of the students who made them have wrong information. So if you just study Quizlet, you're going to actually memorize the wrong things. You're going to get answers wrong because you assumed somebody else had the right answer. It's just kids making them up, okay? ACE did not make the Quizlets. In fact, they don't like Quizlet. So I'm not recommending that you use it. But if you're going to use it, you make your own. And then make sure you have the right answers that you're studying, okay? So these various things are called mnemonic devices, or you might just call them memory aids. In a couple of the English pages, you have to memorize the Dewey Decimal System. So you have the numbers and the categories of what they stand for: gender works, philosophy, religion, social science, language, down here the arts, and what's at the bottom one? History, literature and history. So can you keep them straight, okay? Memorize them in order. So I've had students through the years make up different sayings, and one student made up this one. I just held on to it. It says, Gretel poured red sauce like spaghetti toward the lighthouse. Well, that gives you a visual, okay? You have a funny sentence. Gretel poured red sauce like spaghetti toward the lighthouse. So now that first letter of each of those words matches up with one of these categories. See how that works? And again, if you make it up so that it makes sense to you, you'll remember it better, okay? Let's see if I had something else down on here. So after you, don't just read it, make a study guide, have somebody verbally quiz you, try songs, try pictures, try making up associations between things. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I know in some of the history courses, they have a list of like all of these names. Let's say they're explorers. And then you have a list of all these things that they're famous for. And there's like a dozen of them, and they all sound similar. And if you don't really sound out the names, they all look the same. It can be very confusing, and they're all foreign names. So again, I would take like 3x5 cards and cut them into pieces. And on each one, write a name, okay, of a person, another person, another person. And then on a different piece of paper, write down what they're famous for. And then make it like a matching game. So spread them out on the table, mix them up, and then take one of the names and say, okay, I think this person did this, lay it on top of it. I think this person did this, lay it on top of it. And then after you play your little matching game, go back and check your work. All the ones that you got right, yay, push those aside, study the ones you got wrong, mix them up, and then do a matching game again and see, all right? And in the meantime, if you keep getting them wrong, try to find some funny way or creative way to link that name with the thing that they're famous for. Link them together in your head, all right? Because the more you try to retrieve it from memory and get the right answer, okay, that in, out, in, out, in, out is what helps you learn it. Literally. It's not understanding it, it's forcing your brain to realize, I need to hold on to this. Oh, they're asking for that. I need to come up with that. Okay, I better come up with that answer. And then put it back in, and then pull it back up again. And the more in, out you do, the more you solidify the memory of that, okay? So this is how your brain works. So whether you're trying to memorize verses, whether you're trying to memorize content for a test, it's always the same. The last thing I would say is if there are things you can focus on to try to get some understanding, like for instance, a lot of terminology in biology comes from prefixes like peri, cardium, okay, and what's another one? Is there endocardium, and is there one that starts with M? Now I'm pulling a blank. See? Well, I know that peri is the same root word or prefix that comes like from perimeter, okay, which means around. So I can take the meaning of peri as around. Cardium, you ever heard of cardiac arrest? Cardiac means the heart. And so that Latin root word cardium means heart. So the pericardium is the sac around the heart that protects the heart. So by understanding some of these prefixes, kind of tearing the word down, what are the root words, the prefix, the suffix, and you start learning those, and that actually will help unlock some of your understanding and some of the meaning to some of the terminology that you have to learn in your science courses. Okay? So anyways, I know this video is getting kind of long, and but I hope it's helpful. You're not alone. You may not understand everything, but you have to know it for the test. That's life. We have to memorize some things. And so in order to pass the test, you have to figure out how does your brain work? What do you need to know? What don't you know? What do you need to learn and memorize? And then figure out what creative techniques will help you do that. And maybe you need to get someone in your family kind of involved to help you explore how does your brain memorize things. And then use that as you work through your various, especially the further you get, up in your history and English and science, you're going to have a lot more that you're going to have to memorize. So utilize these things that you're learning about your brain. So it's not just the stuff you're learning for the paces, you're learning how this organ that God gave you works, and you're strengthening that muscle, that organ, to continue to learn. Okay? So anyways, I hope that was helpful. You're not alone. Work hard, and it'll pay off. I hope you do well on whatever test you have coming up next as you apply some of these things.